This is a reading of Chico of the Andes, Chapter 13, The Panama Hat Fair. Buy my meat cakes, buy my sweets. The shrill voice of the food vendor carried over the heads of the gaily dressed, chattering Indians. Empanadas! A wooden tray of hot meat pies was waved under Chico's nose. He sniffed the odor of spices, garlic, and hot grease hungrily. From the little stoves set up on the sidewalks, just as Grandfather had said, came the smell of roasting chicken. There were great clay jars filled with spiced rice, colored red with achiote seeds. Hot-boiled corn, each kernel as large as a marble, sent up steam into the cold morning air. Frying pork hissed and sputtered like small firecrackers. There was food everywhere. Chico had never dreamed there could be so much. He skipped excitedly. Later, when he had sold his hat, he would buy some. He would buy a little of everything. "Cuidado!" someone shouted behind him. Chico jumped aside, and none too soon. Two black oxen, laden with giant sacks of charcoal, plodded down the narrow street and right over the spot where he had just stood. As he jumped, Chico heard a clatter. He turned around and saw that he had bumped into a tray of needles, buttons, and thread and knocked them to the ground. They had been held by a little street seller. "Pardon," he cried, and bent down clumsily to pick up the thread which had rolled into the street. The street seller, looking at him angrily, exclaimed loudly, "Aye, look what you have done." She turned toward the neighboring vendors and went on plaintively, waving her square hands in the air. Here I was, sitting quietly, trying to sell my poor little things, when along comes this great clumsy boy and knocks them into the street. "Who will buy my thread now?" she wailed, holding up a tiny spool with dirt on it from the gutter. The other street sellers nodded. They looked angrily at Chico with their sharp black eyes. "I am very sorry," Chico repeated, his face a fiery red. He escaped into the crowd of Indians, but the woman's shrill voice followed him down the street. Chico had been up since dawn. When he had slipped through the blue door into the cold morning air, the streets were already crowded. Indian women, wrapped closely in blue or red wool scarves, were driving their stubborn pigs down the middle of the street to market. Woodcutters staggered into town under loads of wood, which rose high above their black-haired heads. Last of all, people carried stacks of Panama hats with long, uncut straw hanging to their feet. All hurried toward the marketplace. Chico carried his own hat still wrapped in cloth. Timidly pushing his way through the crowds, he came to the streets that led to the great square where the Panama Hat Fair was held. It seemed as if the buyers and sellers could not wait until they reached it, for each street was blocked by crowds of Indians with their hats. Little groups gathered around the hat buyers. Everyone screamed or chattered. Chico was bewildered. How could he make a buyer listen to him? Chico picked out one buyer who was taller than the others and whose black felt hat could be seen above the Indians. He squirmed toward him and waited at his elbow. A bargain was being made between an Indian hat seller and the agent. Chico listened quietly and watched the crowds surging by. 7 sucres, senor, not a penny less. The man with the hat was a short, barefooted Indian in white cotton trousers. When he spoke, his face wrinkled and twisted earnestly. 7, for this hat. The buyer pointed scornfully at the coarsely woven straw. 3, no more. It is a good hat. See? The Indian turned it around and around to show all sides. But he was careful to hold his finger over the spot where he had spilled his coffee this morning. "As it is you, and you have bought many of my hats, I will take 6, he said with a haughty smile. The agent sniffed. He stared out over the crowd of people as though he had lost interest. His eyes wandered toward the market square and then back to the Indian. 4, he mumbled. The Indian threw up his rough hands. 5. But I am being robbed, he exclaimed. The buyer counted the 5 suka pieces into the other's hand. He reached for the hat and threw it down on the mounting stack beside him. Do not forget to bring me your hat next week, he said agreeably. The Indian nodded. He was as satisfied with the bargain as the buyer. Each had known from the start how much the hat was worth, but it was necessary to dicker over the price. Now it was Chico's turn. He gulped once and found his voice. Senor, Chico of the Andes. No answer. Senor, if you please. The man turned abruptly and Chico jumped. What is it, boy? I am busy now. My hat, Chico whispered. The man shook his head, but Chico had already begun to unwrap the Panama. The buyer watched as bit by bit the finely woven hat appeared. Chico's hand trembled as he handed it over. The man turned it over and looked inside, counting the number of rings in the crown. Where did you get this? He asked. I made it, senor, Chico managed to say. You? The buyer looked doubtfully at the boy. Before Chico could answer, he went on, No matter, I cannot buy it. Not buy it? Chico looked dazed. Everyone had said it was a good hat. Take it to the American buyer. That 2-story house down there, the man said, pointing down the street. I only buy ordinary hats, not expensive ones. Chico laughed shakily. The man had really frightened him, he thought, as he hurried down the street toward the Casa Americana. At the tall white house, the double doors were open. Chico walked into a big room piled high with Panama hats. On one side of the room sat 3 young boys, each with a hat in front of him. Chico stopped to watch them. They were rubbing a yellow-white paste into the straw. This must be the sulphur bath which whitened the hats. The boys' hands moved so fast that the hats were blurred. A tousle-headed boy sneezed and looked curiously at Chico. He pointed toward the stairs when Chico questioned him and said, El Americano? Through there, then upstairs. Chico climbed the steep wooden stairs, looking down on the rows and rows of hats drying and bleaching in the sunlight. He entered another large room. In the very center, almost hidden by a tumbled pile of hats, sat a dark-haired man. This must be the American Chico who had never seen a foreign person, decided. The man's black-rimmed spectacles glinted as he turned his head from the hat in his hand toward the agent standing near him. Too high. Can't use it, he said curtly. The American was measuring the crown and brim of each hat with a little ruler. When the hat seemed to be the right size, he nodded and threw it down beside him. When it was too high in the crown or too narrow in the brim, he handed it back to the agent and shook his head. Suddenly, as though he had eyes in the back of his head, the man turned and said, What is it you want, boy? Here, senor. Chico stepped forward quickly and gave him the hat. The American pursed his lips and set his glasses more firmly on his nose. Did you make this? He asked, looking at the young boy. Chico nodded. It is a very fine hat. Chico smiled. The brim is a little too narrow and the crown too high for this year's fashion. See, this is the size we want. The man measured 2 straws and broke them off. These he laid alongside the hat, 4 inches for the crown, 5 for the brim. Chico himself could see that his hat was wrong. His crown was taller than the brim was wide. Where did you get these measurements? The American went on. Chico shook his head. He had had no measurements, he said. Grandfather had shown him how to make it. Well, that is the reason it is old-fashioned, then. The man looked at Chico kindly. Did he see his mouth trembling? I am sorry, my boy. We have no sale for this hat now, but I tell you, this is a fine weave, as good as many we buy for 50 sukas. Here is what I will do. You take these straws, he handed the measuring straws to the boy, and make me a hat, just like this one, with the crown as high as the short straw and the brim as wide as the other. I will pay you 50 sukas for such a hat, and I will buy as many as you can bring me. How is that?" He sat back and smiled. "You do not want this hat, then?" Chico dragged the words out. He could not believe it. "No, I am sorry." Chico turned away slowly, gripping the unwanted hat in his hot hands. "Where do you live, boy?" came the American's voice. "No place." "But your name? Who is your family? Perhaps I know them." "Chico, senor," he whispered. "And the last name?" "Nothing more. Just Chico." Before the man could say anything, Chico stumbled out of the room and down the stairway. Slowly, he went out into the street. He stared blindly at a whitewashed wall on the opposite side. Just Chico. Chico from nowhere. That was all he would ever be now. He could not sell his hat. His plans were over.